Hello and welcome to this new event, the second day of the Baby Brains annual conference. This year we're talking about bonds and what binds us together, how that happens and how that develops across a lifespan. And this event is particularly exciting in that framework because it's something that is being brought to you by our trainers. So the bonds that are really fundamental part of our own community. And I think you will be amazed today to see what that can create, what can come out from a collaboration of three different people in three completely different places, three different jobs. One thing in common: they are all baby brains trainers, and they all share this passion of building a bridge between science and society. And they've taken the challenge of doing this together and applying it to something new. Because they're tackling the teenage brains, the adolescent's brain. It's true that at the heart of what we do, we have the brain of the baby, the infant brain. But of course, brains live in relationship and in development. So a baby's brain sooner rather than later becomes a teenage brain, and many of us find themselves really having to tackle this new phase and noticing some similarities with the earlier years and then something completely new. And so thank you, Sarah, Georgia, and Federica, who is not here now, for bringing this to us. Let me introduce those three amazing people today. So first of all, Federica is not here, but she is a PhD in psychology. She's a psychotherapist. She works in Italy in the area of Treviso with families. And then we have Sara Scocco, who is a psychologist and psychotherapist in Reggio Emilia, again in Italy. And then finally, Giorgia Bussu, a researcher in neuroscience at the University of Uppsala in Sweden. So they've all linked up together in the last weeks on Zoom, on WhatsApp, emailing each other, and really working hard at trying to understand what happens in the brain of adolescents people, and also working even harder maybe at selecting what the key messages are that you, our followers, can today receive and listen to. And also finding a way to communicate these things in a way that is memorable, that is easy to understand and easy to remember, and even easier than to put into practice if we have adolescent people in the house, or we all live in communities, and so we will probably have teenagers around us, and maybe after this time together we're gonna think with a little bit less circumspection, think of them, and maybe with a little bit more love. Over to you.
Thank you, Silvia. So the title of our presentation, the title we chose is Teen Brain, Thin is Not Thin. And we hope that the reason why we picked this title will unfold during our presentation. Next slide, please. Okay, so for those of you who know Baby Brains, you know that we like to always begin with a little game, because learning through play is more fun and it's more effective. So I'm going to show you 6 pictures that represent 6 different characteristics of teenagers. A being egotistic, self-centered. B being takes unreasonable risks. C being creative. D being reflective. E being lazy, and F being impulsive, does not care about the consequences of his or her actions. So what I'd like you to do is to think from your gut feeling which of these images better suits the average teenager, in your opinion. And if you will, you can write down the answer in the comments so we can read them. And Sylvia, maybe you can tell me something. E, okay, so lazy. While we wait, A, so egotistic, thank you. So while we wait for other answers to come, we're going to show you what the answers of our audience were. So we asked the same question to our public in the past few weeks, and these are the results. So 40% think teenagers are impulsive, 19% creative, so it's a good good characteristic, positive characteristics. 13% goes with lazy, 11 with egotistic, and then 9 with takes risks, and 8 with thoughtful. So as you can see, it seems like the image we have as adults of teenagers is not so positive, not so constructive. We think of them in a manner that represents them in a not so keen, not so positive way. And I'm going to read to you some sentences in the next slide. Some extracts from these sentences. So adolescents lack respect for adults, they disobey, their morality is in decline, they always have a bad mood, they do not have respect for adults, no morals, they're rude, contradict their parents, they're difficult to manage, presumptuous, a frequent change in mood, frequent anger, ignores guidance, and so on. So I'm going to reveal to you who said these sentences. And they are prominent philosophers and thinkers such as Plato, Aristotle, Socrates, Confucius, Nietzsche, Rousseau, that are responsible for those sentences. So as you can see, throughout centuries, throughout millennia, the opinion that adults, and as I was saying, like prominent thinkers and philosophers, have of the youth is again, we are in good company. Like them, we have not so good opinion of teenagers. But if you think about it, how can it be that teenagers through all ages are the worst of society? Like if that was the case, we would be extinct probably as a species. So maybe we should change the way we look at teenagers' behavior and think that what they do maybe does have a sense, does have a meaning. And what we would like to do today is to try to discover that sense and that meaning. Next slide. So our question about the average teenager, of course, was a tricky question, was a trick, because the average teenager, the average adolescent, does not exist. We do know that teenagers are individuals with unique and peculiar characteristics, and knowing those peculiar characteristics is what can enlighten us on the group of teenagers. And as the average teenager does not exist, so we do not, at the same way, we do not have one recipe that works for every teenager. So as we will see in our presentation, we really need to be in the relationship with them to understand what's going on. The good news, though, is that knowledge is power. So knowing a little bit of what actually happens inside the teenager's brain can maybe help us to better understand their behaviors, their intentions, and maybe live better with the up and downs that teenagers always bring to us. So I will leave it to Georgia to tell us more about what happens inside the adolescent brain.
To start by showing a little bit more about the changes, structural and functional changes in the adolescent brain. And I wanted to start from the gray matter, and that's the actual part with the computation and information elaboration occurs within the brain. And if we think of the brain of an infant or a child as a little plant that grows leaf by leaf and then up until it becomes a full and very rich tree, then you can think of a brain as it grows throughout the first years of life as a building up in terms of connections and in terms of volume and growing up and up until it kind of reaches full potential in terms of having full power of elaborating all sorts of information coming through experience from the environment and acquiring all the skills that are necessary and that keep the brain busy throughout the first years of life, throughout infancy and early childhood. But what happens is that, of course, the adolescent brain is in this case the full tree. And what occurs is that you have some sort of a stage in which you need to select what is important to keep and what we need to kind of disregard. And that's what's happening with the pruning process. So it's pretty much like what we do with trees and plants. So we just trim down what we consider to be unnecessary to optimize full blooming and life of the plant. So in our case, with our adolescent, what we do is basically the brain select what is necessary to keep and what can go away, basically in terms of brain connection. And so the volume, the brain gray matter volume, increases and reaches its peak in adolescence and then goes down again through adulthood. And that corresponds to a time of functional specialization. And so what we see is that the emergence of those more unique and peculiar characteristics and talents and interests that we see in adolescence and that we keep throughout adulthood are emerging at this time, which we actually select based on experience what's worth keeping. At the same time, there is a parallel process that's affecting the white matter, so the other component of the brain, and that is more of a structural component that is pretty much the accents of the neuronal cell through which the information flows, and that actually builds up to the structural fibers of the brain connecting different brain areas in short and long ranges. And what we see is that in the adolescent brain, we have an increase in white matter that actually corresponds to the myelination maturation period. And the myelin is the fat substance that covers the axon of the neuronal cell, and that allows to a better flow of information and signal throughout the cell, and then a flow throughout the whole fiber. So what is happening basically during adolescence is that the country road that you built up as an infant and in early childhood throughout the brain, then it's paved and it gets up to being a full highway in which the information can actually travel very fast and very quickly and efficiently throughout the brain. And that's what you actually see in terms of behaviors as well, higher activity and flexibility, and how the maturation of the white matter pathways can actually affect the behavior that you see in adolescence. So if you put together the two different main structural changes in terms of the brain in adolescence, what you see is that you go from a mixture, a very complex pattern of wires that you have kind of collected and built up together during the early life years. And then during adolescence, what you do is basically you just select those wires that are worth keeping and then just try and pull them together into a very ordered pattern so that information can be selected and can flow more efficiently. So that's what's happening from a structural level, but also has a functional significance. And that's mostly because of the structural changes that we see largely occur in those areas of the brain that are underlying a function that is called of mentalizing or theory of mind. So how you can read somehow or just put yourself into the mind of another person, not only emotionally, but actually in the mind of the other person. And so it's a very complex and unique skill of the human, and that we can try and learn that together through playing the very baby brain style. So I want to start with showing different aspects of theory of mind. So starting by the more cold aspect, more cognitive linguistic aspect of theory of mind. So starting with the director task. So you can see here in this picture, there is kind of a bookshelf, and then there are objects in there. And then on the other side, there is the director. So you have different perspectives, and the director is going to tell you or ask you to move one object. So for example, it's going to ask you to move the smaller bowl towards the spot down there. So which kind of bowl would you move? Which bowl are you thinking about moving if I ask you, or if I am the director telling you to move the smaller bowl? You can maybe try and answer in the comments. Yeah, so it's very difficult to try and get to the right answer because it depends on the mentalizing skills that you have and actually put yourself in the perspective, in this case, the spatial perspective of the director. So the yellow bow, you would think, okay, this is not the smallest one, but at the same time, this is the smallest one that the director will see because the white one is not visible from his perspective. So you see this kind of skill requires more high-level cognitive abilities and language abilities that usually are fully developed by adolescents, but at the same time, it depends on individual variability. Then there is the other component of theory of mind that is more of a emotional and more socially related. It can be, for example, the nonverbal recognition of emotional expressions from the face, for example. And in this case, you have a children book. So this is a skill that you start developing very early on. And if I asked you, what would you think what Muhammad felt? Would it be frightened or brave? What would you think? So probably this is a quite easy one. So in this case, Muhammad would be frightened. But what's most difficult would be to try and link together the emotional component and the more high level cognitive component of theory of mind and try and think of, okay, what is happening in that person's mind? Is it only in terms of understanding the emotion and reading the body and the face expression, but also put that in a context based on what happened before, what's happening in that exact moment, and what's going to happen next? So try and predict behavior based on your assumptions and inference in terms of the state of mind of that person in that context. And this is extremely complicated because you need to separate yourself and your experience of things that might be scary in this case and think about how Muhammad felt. In this case, it was not frightened, it was actually brave. So this is a very complex skill that is still developing throughout adolescence up until adulthood. And it depends a lot on the kind of social experience that you have. So the adults are considered to be, in a way, more skilled in this kind of ability, also because they rely a lot on the examples of social interaction they had throughout their lives so that they can build up on better predictions. So it is important for the adolescents to try and build up to that, but also from our perspective to try and exercise our theory of mind when we think that the adolescent in our case would not, understand how we feel or understand our position. We need to exercise our own skills of theory of mind. I think that they are maybe not only not willing to do that, it's most likely that the brain is still working hard to get there, and we need to kind of be patient and be propositive in that sense. And if we think about the neural patterns that underlie this function, we see that this is kind of confirms the behaviors that we have talked about in the different exercises. So basically what we have is that the spatial distribution of the theory of mind network in the adolescent brain is a little bit different than the adult one, and it's underlying some sort of change of strategy. So in the adolescent network, you see more of a way of the prefrontal cortex that's more involved in direct sensory stimuli processing and emotional control. Whereas in the adult theory of mind networks, you have a higher weight of the posterior area. So you can interpret that in terms of a strategy that's highly reliant on the previous experience. And if we think of the theory of mind network and how that relates to different kind of behaviors that occur throughout adolescence, you definitely think about peer influence and how the opinion of friends sometimes are more important for an adolescent compared to family, parents, or a teacher, and how that influences their own self-esteem and their own definition of their own identity. So we know from a neuroscience perspective that the theory of mind network of an adolescent is more active compared to that of an adult, especially in situations like a known social, not pretty specific socially, specific evaluations of tasks, but also in relation to social risks like social exclusion. So the adolescent brain is more reactive in that sense. And if you put that together with the results that we get from the reward stream of processing studies, we understand that basically what we have throughout adolescence and up until then adulthood, and we keep that kind of feature, is that the brain areas that undergo the most structural changes throughout adolescence are also the one that seem to mediate a change in learning strategy that is strongly reliant on positive feedback from the environment rather than just punishment and negative reward. So it's really about the reward network that is most reliant on those positive feedback to try and modulate learning that we get from the environment. And the positive feedback is strongly reliant on the social specific sensitivity of the adolescent brain. And this can actually help us understand those behaviors that sometimes are more worrisome in relation to adolescents, for example, risk evaluation. So we know that adolescents tend to somehow take more risks, but at the same time, it depends on the context. So we have an idea as adults that they are not able to evaluate risks appropriately, but at the same time, that is not supported from a scientific perspective. So we know that the adolescent brain is strongly active in response to complex emotional signals like the sense of guilt. They can actually process risks as much as an adult, and they have the same likelihood on a one-on-one comparison to an adult to take risks. What changes is the context. So when you have the presence of friends or peers, then the adolescent is 3 times more likely to take risky decisions. And we can try and interpret that in relation to the reward system that we have seen before and the mentalizing network. So they have a higher sensitivity to social situations, especially social exclusion, and they rely a lot on positive social feedback from their peers. So that counts much more in the adolescent brain than the fear of risks and punishment from family or teachers. And we can try and use this kind of knowledge, for example, in prevention campaigns. So we know that the adolescents tend to take risky decisions when it comes, for example, to smoking or doing drugs or anything, and we try to scare them off. So we show these nasty images of Pullmans and think about, okay, this is extremely scary, they will not smoke anymore. But we know that this is not really functioning, and it's not really working fine, not even for adults as well. So this is not really building up on the knowledge that we have for the reward system. So somehow it would be more effective, and we have seen some prevention campaigns here, in this case in Italy, but similar campaigns in the US. So we could actually build up on a kind of knowledge and the values that are most valuable for the adolescents in their actual life, and that would be the social context and their social relationships with their peers. So try to build up on that to tackle onto the reward system rather than just scare them off. And at the same time, we always need to ask ourselves whether these risky behaviors serve a purpose. So here we see an example of a flu that happened in Italy, in the northern part of Italy a while ago, some weeks ago, and that created a lot of damage and a lot of problems for very many families. And what we see here is a picture on the newspaper about adolescents who actually helped out a lot with the rescue teams and everything. But at the same time, we just found a post on social media about this kind of mismatch between the adult and the adolescent perspective. So basically, the adults still seem not to get it, and they are only focused on the fact that the adolescents are taking risks. They have no safety measure or preparation. They do not really see that they are the risks that they are taking. They go into draining holes to try and help out, but at the same time, it's very dangerous. But that's only one side of the story. At the same time, the adolescents, their risky behavior seems to serve a very noble purpose here. So they have a strong sense of compassion, a strong sense of altruism, and that's played out nicely in this case in a very helpful situation in which they could take the risk, but that served indeed the purpose of being useful to the community and actually find on that social connection that the adolescent brain is lingering towards. And in terms of social connection, as parents, sometimes we're very worried about the fact that adolescents tend to be a lot connected to their phone or on social media. And at the same time, this kind of parallels out with some sort of fears that happened in the past in terms of technology use and how that influences the brain. And we have the same fears for the younger brains. But we do not know exactly what is happening from a scientific perspective in the brain of an adolescent that's using social media in this case. We know that it can be problematic, but at the same time, we need to take into account the perspective that it can serve a purpose and it can be useful. And we have results from a recent study that has shown an inverted U-shaped relationship between the use of digital screen engagement in a daily basis, and the mental well-being as perceived by the adolescent. So basically very little use or extreme use or negative, but at the same time average use seems to be the most effective in terms of improving or at least maintaining good perception of well-being from the adolescent perspective. So we need to take this into account and actually try and ask ourselves, what is the purpose of this behavior? This is connection, this is social kind of functioning that they try and explore across their all different modalities that they have at hand, so we can actually think about molding and scaffolding the environment to try and accommodate those needs rather than just preventing them from putting at use. And if we think about a model for the brain and then the functioning of the brain in the adolescent brain, we can actually think about 3 different functions and networks, and happening across 3 main different levels within the brain, but also, of course, interacting and overlapping to some large extents. And I want to highlight the emotional processing and reactivity here in this case, highlight the amygdala, but then at the same time, at an intermediate brain level, there is the reward system processing and risk appraisal, and then we have at a higher level, more of a cortical level, the prefrontal cortex, focusing on executive function control and inhibition. And we know that these 3 different functions and networks are already in place and functioning and working fine in the adolescent brain, but at the same time, it's the balance between the 3 of them that is different in the adolescent compared to adult brain. And in particular, it's the prefrontal areas or the more executive control networks that is still working on towards full maturation. And so there is no direct and clear prompt inhibition as in the adult brain. And so what you have is that you have an imbalance that is more way on towards the emotion processing and reactivity in the adolescent compared to the adult. And I just want to leave the floor to Sarah to see what are the implications in terms of psychological and mental health.
Yes, thank you, Georgia. And it's precisely for the reason Georgia was explaining that we see that during adolescence, there is an increase in the onset of mental health disorders. As you can see in the graph here, the onset of some of the most common mental health disorders like ADHD, anxiety disorders, mood disorders, schizophrenia, substance abuse, and other mental illnesses, they all have the onset about between 10, 11, and 25, which is the range we commonly accept for the puberty, the beginning of puberty and the end of what we call adolescence. So there must be something that happens in the teenage brains that exposes them to a higher vulnerability compared to other periods of life. And if you think about it, these two concepts, potential and vulnerability, often go together. If you think to the most vulnerable age of all, which is probably the first few years of life, it's also the moment where we know that the learning curve has a peak, reaches its highest level. But at the same time, little children, infants, are so vulnerable and so much in need for our protection and nurture. And the same thing happens in another period of life where we see individuals, particularly women, at their in their most powerful and generative moment, which is pregnancy. And we also know that that is exactly a moment of increased vulnerability for mental illnesses. So every time we have this explosion of potential of roads that open before us, we also have an increase in vulnerability. So what can we do about this vulnerability for our teenagers? Next slide, please. The unique meeting between the biology that Georgia so wonderfully showed us in the previous slides, and the environment, that is what we think that will guide us through life. So it's not biology itself, it's not the environment itself, it's the unique meeting of the two. So if you will, you can think of it like in the metaphor we suggested here. If you put an airplane engine into a city car, into a compact car, well, it can be explosive, it can be very damaging, but it could also be wonderful. You know, the path it takes, it all depends on the way we care for it, on the way we follow it. Okay, so the same thing happens with our teenagers. The imbalance Georgia was talking to you about between the inhibition and the emotional parts of the brain, if not cared for, if not being looked at, can be explosive and can lead to a higher risk for mental illnesses. But if we know what is really happening in there, what's the magic and the wonder that is going on in that brain, that opening towards others, the improving and being putting so much effort in trying to understand others and the self, then we can create the right environment. And for environment, of course, I mean the physical environment, social environment, and family in that environment, to make that potential explode in a positive and socially adaptive way. Because as Georgia was saying, maybe all this risk taking, all this trying to jump over the line that our teenagers do, maybe it's not there by chance. Maybe our brain has adapted throughout the millennials so that teenagers can go further than their parents. Okay, so we as adults are more driven by fear, we're more static, we're more conservative, and teenagers through the wall, beyond the obstacle. So maybe taking the right sort of risk, like the teenagers we saw helping in the flooding in Emilia-Romagna, maybe it's something we should really encourage. Okay, next slide. So what are the protective factors? We were talking about the environment, which is very general, and it's a huge topic, and we would need probably an entire presentation only for that. But let's just say here that what we know is that a key factor in protecting our kids and ourselves from mental health disorders is flexibility. And how do we gain flexibility? Flexibility is the ability to adapt to different contexts as the context change. So if we are perfectly adapted to one specific context, but when that situation, when that environment changes, because we change school, we change friends, we just grow up into a different stage, and we do not have other strategies, that's when we find ourselves stuck and into a mental difficulty. So we really need to have the most diverse experiences possible throughout our lives that will enable us to make our different strategies to cope with different situations. So it's sufficient to have one attachment figure with a secure and balanced attachment. And if we then encounter other situations, other attachment figures, other adults, other teachers, educators, sport coach, and then as we grow, our peers, all this diversity just enables us to be more prepared for the different situations we can encounter, and so be more resilient, more flexible, and this protects us from the rigidity of neurotic disorders. Okay, next. And another wonderful thing that happens in our teenagers' brains, Georgia was telling us about the drive and the effort they put into trying to understand others and trying to make sense of others' behavior, others' mental intentions and states. But all those resources apply also to themselves. So teenagers are also occupied in trying to understand themselves and their own perspective and their own way of behaving, way of approaching the world, and they ask themselves questions about themselves. And so what happens is a change in the way of knowing themselves from infancy and school years through adolescence. As children mainly know themselves and their reactions through a procedural memory, procedural knowledge, which, as we know, is mainly implicit, not conscious. So we just do what we do as kids, and we do not have a rational comprehension of why we are doing what we are doing. Well, this changes during teenagers' years. We have a new window of opportunity in which teenagers can actually take the chance to become aware of why they are doing what they're doing, why they're behaving the way they're behaving, why others, namely attachment figures, are behaving like they are behaving. And all these questions can end into a decision to maybe change a little bit and to reassess the way we want to walk in the world. So again, adolescence is not a time period that we want to just go through as fast as possible or just to, forget about it. It should be viewed as a mine of opportunities for teenagers and for the parents to review and gain a new perspective, a new consciousness about themselves, also in addition to others. Okay. So as we are approaching to the conclusion of our presentation, let's see some practical ideas for parents and teachers that are listening to us. First of all, seems trivial, but it's not. Relationship comes first. So we have the information, we know what's going on, but then what we should do with our teenager, nobody can tell us. There are no manuals, no experts that can tell us exactly what to do with our teenager. We need to stay into the relationship with him or her. We need to be able to step back a little bit because we need for them, we saw how important the relationship with peers compared to the relationship with adults is. So we really need to let them explore that part. They need to go out into the world. At the same time, they need to know what the limits are, and they need to know that we are there to take them back when something goes wrong and not be angry at them, but just, be there for them and rethink about what happened together. So, of course, we need to trust them. And trust does not mean we are sure they're always going to make the right choice, but we know that they can go into the world and maybe get hurt a little bit, but they always know they can come back to us and fix whatever went wrong. We need to respect them. They are individuals. Again, like we need to respect children, we need to respect teenagers. And as I was saying, we need to support them emotionally, okay? They really need to know we are there for them, even if not physically, like they needed when they were little kids, but we need to be there emotionally always for them. Could be a good idea to give them some tips, some explanations of what is going on into their brains, so maybe they can get a hint of what the meaning of some ups and downs is, And also, we should support them, motivate them in doing the things they need to do to discover themselves. You know, we saw with Georgia how the brain is pruning in adolescence to find their own path. So that's their duty as adolescents, and we really need to be there for them, to not stress them, not stress them with fears, with punishment or angers. We know that those things do not work. They probably only bring them further away from us. And needless to say, we really need to set a positive and good example, because even if they have new exploding metacognitive capacities, as humans, as all we do, we always learn from example. So we really need to be the example, and we really need to do what we would like them to be and to do. So these are the three key words, the take-home message: stimulation, example, and support. So we need to stimulate them, to be as an example, and to support them. So I'm going to read to you, and we are really going towards the end, an extract from a play that was written by some teenagers after they had discovered some things about the way their brain works, from Sarah Jane Blackmore herself, who is an expert in this field, and goes like this: "My brain doesn't function poorly. There's a reason for it. I'm becoming who I am, and I'm scared. Are you scared too? Because who I am might not be who you want me to be, or who you are. And I don't know why, but I don't say that everything will be fine. There are so many things I don't tell you anymore. So many things I've written, but I can't say. I want to say them, but I can't. I take my plate, I bring it to the kitchen, and I go upstairs." So we're really ending now. We would like to leave you with these two tips about adolescence: less judgment and more wonder. And if we judge less our adolescents, and if we allow ourselves to wonder and to be amazed by what they are able and capable to do, then we really stay in the relationship. And only in that way we can grow, and we can go really further. So thank you, and see you soon.
Thank you so much, Sarah and Georgia. This has been such an interesting talk, and such a easy to understand one. I think, although the things that you have shared with us are quite complex, and they might be a bit daunting when we, find them in books or in articles. You really made an amazing job at making them tangible and real, and almost like, oh yeah, of course, makes a lot of sense. So thank you so much for this. It was like a huge task that you dare to start, and you've done it absolutely brilliantly. Thank you from our side, from Baby Brains, and thank you from the side of every parent who has an adolescent child, or anyone who really is looking into these things. I think educators, teachers would really benefit from approaching teenagers more respectfully and with more knowledge. And it's so nice that now we do have knowledge, and you made it so nice and accessible for us. Challenges ahead as well. The safe harbor metaphor that we really like to use in Baby Brains, like being there for them when they need us, not pushing them out, not bringing them in. It has to grow to a whole new level now with adolescents, and but we can see it's really always this idea of shaping the environment around ourselves and our family in a way that bonds can work in there, basically, that those bonds allow us to go as far as we are actually able to go, and then come back where we can nurture each other. So thank you so much for bringing this to us in such an effective and beautiful way. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Silvia. Thank you, Georgia.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you. Thank you to all the followers. Thanks.